share my screen. Hopefully I'm sharing the right screen. We got it?
Yes, we have.
Excellent, excellent. Hi, everybody. My name is Shane Coman, and delighted to be here to have a chat. I'm a founder and CEO of a reg tech business based in Ireland called Nexus Assurance, and today is not for selling, but the reason that we're able to talk to DORA is that we have a digital workflow platform, and it does support firms that are sort of captured by the DORA regulation. It's not the only area that we focus in, but DORA is a very interesting topic, and it is specific to the EU. But you'll notice that increasingly across borders in the financial services sector, operational resiliency is becoming a board level accountability, right? So it's no longer in respective teams, it's percolating up to the top of the house. And DORA, which stands for the Digital Operational Resilience Act, is the EU's answer to one of the defining questions in financial services, which is how do we keep the financial system operational when our dependencies are digital, distributed, and in many cases outside of our direct control. So basically it's new legislation that is effectively trying to target solving that problem. Now, I won't go into too much detail in this presentation. I won't go into the depths of it, but I know that there's a couple of people there that are involved in DORA, and if you want to have a secondary conversation, happy to do that, and we can go quite deep. But hopefully this is a sort of an information piece for people that have just heard the word DORA and want to learn a little bit more. Just want to talk about personal real consequence about operational resiliency not going well. So I used to have a senior role in a bank called BNY Mellon, and two things that stick in my mind that I have these wounds and scars from. One was in an accounting system that we used. We had hundreds of people working on this accounting system to provide pricing to the pensions world. And that third-party system failed on us, and it just meant that people that were trying to access their pensions for a period of time could not get paid. So significant impact. And that led to a personal impact on me where I slept, I'd say, on average 2.5 hours over a 2-week period to try and help the teams to get ourselves back up and running. A second example is Central Bank of Ireland fined BNY Mellon, which I was sitting on the board of in Ireland, quite a significant sum for outsourcing framework deficiencies. So this is even before DORA, where there was a significant focus on sort of outsourcing governance within the financial services sector. So I do think I can somewhat speak to the bad outcomes, and that probably has enabled me to deliver a good product for the industry as we've developed our RegTech product. So what is DORA, right? So DORA is a piece of legislation that applies to banks, insurance companies, fund managers, so that's asset managers, investment firms, payment institutions, and some of their critical ICT providers in Europe. Not all regulated companies are captured, but there's a significant amount that are. And because there's so many that are captured, generally there's an expectation that all firms are going to raise their standards to the DORA level. As I mentioned, the objective is that so these financial services can withstand and recover from ICT incidents, and regulators will be able to supervise firms consistently across the EU. And there's 5 pillars or core parts of DORA. Now, there's a little bit outside of this, but you'll be familiar, those that are involved in this call, a lot of you called out, you're involved in business continuity, resilience, etc. So you'll understand and see and know what these things are. But first one is ICT risk management framework. So that seems sensible, have the right governance, identification, protection, etc., and recovery standards for your ICT infrastructure. The second one is instant reporting, which is quite bespoke to the regulated space. The regulators want to hear about critical incidents in a very particular and sequential manner. The third one is digital operational resiliency testing. Again, you'll be familiar with those that are involved in cybersecurity, threat-led penetration testing. So in certain scenarios, certain levels of testing are required. But testing is core of any good resiliency strategy. So again, it's not new. Third-party risk management. You have to have a full life cycle of that management framework, and there needs to be strong oversight of ICT providers. Again, it doesn't sound overly new. It sounds like what should be a core pillar to good resilience anyway. And then the final one is information sharing. So optional cooperation between firms on cyber threats and vulnerabilities. You need to keep yourself informed. So, what does it look like? That's common sense. All of those 5 things are something that a strong firm that's trying to protect themselves should have in place anyway. But what DORA does is it articulates specifics to what these things should look like within financial services firms. And also it's legislation. So it brings to the table a law, not best practice. Like it's basically saying you have to do this rather than what was there before, you should do this. Okay. That being said, there are significant challenges for DORA implementation. So DORA is now live, it's law, and firms have been working towards getting themselves implemented. One of the challenges is a very particular item within the DORA requirements, and that's something called the Register of Information. And what is that? Basically, it's a list of your third-party ICT vendors. Again, sounds simple, but again, regulators make things complicated. They want a very deep summary of that. Lots of data, who are the contracts with, who are the signing parties to those contracts, how exactly do those ICT vendors impact your business, what functions, what entities. And in a complex organization like many financial services firms are, that's quite difficult to put together. And it goes to your regulator, your local regulator, and then it goes onwards to the European regulator. And because they're looking for the information, they've set it out in a very specific data set. And it has been an absolute car crash for industry. And there will be jobs forevermore in the Register of Information space. And if people ever want to find a home for themselves, becoming an expert on the register will lead to work. I guarantee you that. We've tons of experience in that, having sort of supported that through our platform. The second challenge is the accountability and evidence into the firm. Because it's legislation, boards get scared, right? And they now think we're accountable for this. It's law. We don't want to break the law. So many boards and committees are saying to their teams, those working in business resiliency in the IT risk management framework, please evidence to us that we're compliant with DORA. And that's a really difficult thing to do. How do you present that? Who is it that does that? So part of this is operations, part of it is the IT vendor management team, part of it is IT risk management, and it's many parties or people that are involved. So how do you, in a concise way, get that up to the board? So there's a bit of chaos in regard to that in the industry at the moment, and different firms are doing it in different ways. So that's probably the second biggest challenge. And then the third one is supplier contracts and the associated oversight of suppliers. Again, oversight is nothing new, but what they've done is they have put into the DORA the DORA legislation, what are the terms you need to have in your contracts. And that has meant that firms have to revisit basically all of their contracts with suppliers. And many of those suppliers aren't in the EU, so they're being quite difficult to firms. So you're in a situation where now these contracts that you have are not compliant with legislation. So it's a bit of a difficult exercise and an absolute goldmine for legal firms. And that was probably the first thing that service providers jumped on. The legal firms came out and said, this is what you should do. So that was the early spend in this was probably spent on those particular items. DORA is legislation, like I said, and it's not guidance, it's actually the law. So what teeth does it have? So, it's a legal obligation, so you must apply, and it's not just having regard to it, and violations can trigger significant impacts. Second thing is quite nuanced for financial services. So there's going to be direct supervision of IT suppliers, certain ICT suppliers. So all of these firms have sent their data about who are their suppliers to their local regulator, who in turn sent it to the European regulators. They looked at all of that data. They're still looking, by the way, and they're going to come up with maybe 10 IT services companies that they deem to be of significant importance to the European financial services sector. So the likes of Google, Microsoft, etc., are going to fall into that. And then Europe is going to oversee those firms in a new manner. So there's a little bit more regulatory interactions between the suppliers and the regulators themselves. Harmonized enforcement. So that is where the local regulators, like the Central Bank of Ireland in Ireland and other ones in other countries, don't go off themselves and design what is best practice or what are the guidelines associated with IT oversight. It's a harmonized approach, and all those local regulatory bodies need to apply against DORA as well, which is good. There's obligations in terms of regulatory reporting. You have to send your information register in once a year. When you have incidents, you have to send them in with a certain amount of days, etc., etc. So there's a lot more transparency, and that with it gives the regulators the ability to see that you're doing a poor job. So I'll give you an example. If you are an asset management company and you have 50 employees and you manage $100 billion, let's say, and there's another massive management company that looks very similar, same amount of employees, same amount of assets in their business, and you're sending in a supplier list and a reliance list to your regulator that's very light in comparison to the other company, who are they going to look at? So it's very easy now for them to go, they're the companies that we want to go into, because we can see that they're reporting stuff that's way lighter than what's actually sitting in their peer group. So that's going to draw attention for firms. And then finally, penalties and sanctions. So now this law is in place. If you do not prove that you're abiding by DORA, they'll scratch the surface, then they'll go deeper and do investigations, and ultimately that will lead to a fine for those companies. And that would probably happen not in 2026 because it's so new, but you'll see that come through in 2027. And fines are very impactful, not just for the firm themselves, they're also impactful for the directors, because most of these independent directors and non-executive directors have other directorships. And if you're seen to be involved in firms that get sanctioned and fines, the chances are that you won't be the person that's on the top of the list for the next job that you're putting yourselves forward for. So there's a huge pressure on those executives in the teams to make sure that they're delivering, because their independent directors are very nervous about that particular concept. And that's it. Helen did tell me I had to nudge through this 10 to 15 minutes. I don't even know where I hit, but that's at a very, very high level, DORA in financial services. And like I said, I'd be very happy to have a deeper conversation with anybody. This is, the intricacies are worth deeper conversations if you're ever interested. And that's it, but we can open it up for questions.
Thank you, Shane. Yeah, really, really, really good overview. So yeah, has anyone got any questions in terms of what was just discussed, in terms of some of the challenges maybe they're having that they want to discuss with the group or share?
I'll just kick in and say thank you, Shane. That was a really great overview. I love the bit about the register of information, potential money pot from people like me. Yeah, what's your? I heard about your sort of background. Where do you think the direction of travel is in terms of how firms are adopting it now, and where do you see them in 2027?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question, Rob. The legislation came through and went live early this year. So the first real delivery, and that's not what you're meant to do to be compliant, right? But the first real delivery and handover to the regulators was this register of information. Okay, so a huge amount of focus was on that, and that's the tendency. And I think that's an unfortunate byproduct of this. The register was too complicated, and it's the first and only delivery in 2025, so everybody is focused on that. But DORA is about tying together and making yourself more resilient. Like a register doesn't make you more resilient. I'm not so sure. So I think what's going to happen now is boards and committees are going to sort of wake up to, right, this is a little bit deeper and wider to that. I want to get comfortable about our resiliency within the IT side. So explain to me our risks, explain to me where we are in regard to those. And there's a little bit more pressure on the real stuff going to be put on people and organizations over the next while. But like I mentioned, the regulators are going to be quite intrusive, and there's a little bit of wiggle room for a period. But I think in 2026 they're going to be going into firms. That will lead to letters back out to industry to say firms that we looked at were not good enough. You all need to up your game. And that's another bit of energy. Consultants will come in and support firms, and then in 2027, 2028, those that haven't listened are going to get some fines, and that's going to create more energy. So this is it's a cyclical process, and it happens in lots of different areas: guidance, bit of time, investigation, warning letters that are public, and then you get sanctions, and it's like this drip of extra effort. So the resources that are allocated to this are going in one direction and one direction only.
It strikes me also, Shane, in what you just said, it's very similar to when the operational resilience regulations came out in the UK. Again, it was very much step one is think about important business services, and do those things. And then step two was, now let's make this actually work in your organizations and make this how you operate. And I mean, the register of information is obviously almost that step one, maybe even lighter touch, but has become the focus because people are not then thinking about that longer term. And do you see that's kind of, again, how this is going to go in terms of, therefore, there'll be much more import put on the fact that you've got to make this work, you've got to make the organization resilient.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, I mean, and the clues are in lots of those things that you've sent to the regulator. You've made a statement in that data. It doesn't look like a statement, but in that data, it sort of calls out there's 3 or 4 ICT providers that are critically important to us, right? So what should a board do? They should reflect on that and go, I need to know more about that, right? And but they haven't realized that yet. They're not using those tools because it was a little bit muddy.
It's a list.
Yeah. So
list right now.
But you're exactly right. I mean, that's where committees and boards need to go in regard to this. I did see a question come in.
Yes, it's going to come to Monica's question now. Yes,
It doesn't apply to it doesn't apply to public service. It's just financial services and specific to financial services where. And when you talk about financial services, it's like regulated and a certain type of regulated firm. However, it does have this surround sound impact. If you were outside of that realm and you provide a service into financial services and it is an ICT service, you're sort of caught by it. You're not regulated, but you're going to be treated by the bank as having to up your standards, and they'll ask you questions. Are you DORA compliant yourself? So it is very confined to financial services, but service providers are hearing about this, and it's a bit of a pain for them.
Yeah.
Thank you, Shane.
No problem.
Just leading on that, Shane, what do you think the likelihood is that it could get expanded to companies outside of financial services, so that it becomes almost like it doesn't really matter what sector you play in or what type of business you are? This is perhaps going to become like a one-size-fits-all type scenario.
I think it will evolve, but it won't be DORA. So DORA sort of was championed by specific regulatory bodies in Europe that are financial services, and I'd say they're quite protective of it. But if you went into you know, if you went into pharmaceuticals, you know, obviously there's regulatory bodies that are in that space and DORA, so they're going to learn from what's over there and done already in the European environment. So there's no doubt that some of these lessons are going to be pushed and put into other guidance, maybe not legislation. Legislation is heavy-handed, takes a huge amount of effort to get over the line. Like, it takes millions and millions and millions and millions of European effort to get everybody to agree to this. So they're reluctant to sort of do that across the board. But you're right. I mean, the best practice that is there will probably be adopted in part or in shape by other regulatory bodies that may not be financial services. But the shape of it, I'm not sure it'll be legislation. But it's like, you saw that page where I had sort of the 5 pillars. It's just, that's standard stuff, right? And it's just the intricacies and the nuances in regard to some of those will be different for financial services. But if you're a well-disciplined, organized firm that's trying to protect itself, they're the things that you're going to have in place. So
I think that's a really good point, Shane. And again, I think to Sarah's question, that, you know, we often see that finance as a very regulated sector is a leader in a lot of this, in terms of resilience specifically. You know, what happens in that sector does tend to then influence what other sectors are thinking about. To your point, it's not usually regulatory at that point, and it's not necessarily enshrined in law, but it becomes a standard and the practice that we should be holding ourselves up to. And I think, again, as you said, those 5 pillars that you talked about, those are, if you are looking as an organization, how do you prepare for any disruption, that is what you should be thinking about. And again, it's not a lot of it is necessarily new and different. It's just applying a bit of a different lens on it, because it is kind of giving a bit more pressure to recognizing the importance of certain providers in keeping your organization going. And again, back to your point about, it's really an element of pushing it up to the board, which we spend a lot of time talking about, and practitioners, all of us in different disciplines, spend a lot of time talking about how do we get them on board, how do we get them engaged in helping us to make an organization prepared. And that's a lot of what this, to me, sounds like this regulation is almost supporting. It's that, you know, you actually need to do something about this rather than just put it down in a document. Absolutely.
I mean, this needs to be in your top 3 list of important things that you need to consider as a board. We see financial services as a significant potential impact, negative impact. Sorry, IT risk is a significant risk for financial services. You as a board need to be all over it, and by sticking it into legislation, it's going to force it to do that. It's a little bit like, we all remember GDPR, data protection. It's the same thing. It's that now is in legislation, so it's just it has to be something that firms consider. Rob, you've hand up.
Thank you. Just a quick one. 2 things. How does this compare to the NIS directive? I'm assuming it's more like a vertical rather than the horizontal. And as you said, it sounds like something that companies should have been already got in on track, but to a higher level of quality. But specifically, the second part of the question is, well, so what does a supplier say to a DORA customer that says, yes, I am DORA compliant? Is there a check, or how? So what?
Yeah, so two really good questions. So the NIS, there's quite a lot of commonality in NIS, and the thing is, NIS doesn't apply to the firms that are caught by DORA generally. So it's like bringing it across. So if you look them line by line, they're not the same, but there is a significant amount of crossover, right? So it's good. So a lot of the standards that you're applying in this are going to bring value to DORA if you have an organization that happens to be caught by both, because if you're in a conglomerate and NIS is impacted this side, DORA is impacted another side. In regards to service providers themselves, You know, it's a silly question to ask before a supplier, but this is what happens, right? So I get asked these questions every so often. So am I DORA compliant? No, I'm not, because I'm not DORA regulated. However, the things that are set in stone in DORA, we are good at, and they apply to us. So do we have an appropriate IT risk management framework? Yes, we do. And here's the component parts of that. Do we, in our contracts with you as a customer, give you the ability to do X, Y, and Z? Yes, we do. So we're contractually good and aligned to DORA in how we play ball with yourself. Do we have subcontractors, and do we have an oversight practice for them? Yes, we do. So that's the pitch back. You sort of nearly play back those pillars back to an organization to say, this is how we abide by these things, but we're not caught by DORA. So I'm not going to sit there and say I am DORA compliant, because it's not my regulation. However, the pillars and associated requirements of DORA, there's proportionality in everything, but we're rock solid. And what generally gets us over the line in that conversation is we also have an ISO 27001 certificate. So which covers quite a few of the bits and pieces in a similar way. Good question.
I think that's a really good point as well, around kind of other regulatory or requirements or other guidance out there that covers some of this that some organizations may be compliant with, and how does that then fit with what DORA is asking, or where can you use that to demonstrate, again back to that question of, are you DORA compliant? Well, no, I'm not, but I have these things in place, and yet I also do these elements that are set out in the standard. So
and what this is a hard thing to do, but we're young enough that we could do it from the start. Like the controls that we have in place for our business, let's say it's release, taking on employees, we basically point those controls, evidence those controls, but we point them then to ISO something and policy or a client agreement that tells us we need to do that, or DORA, whatever it is. So when we look at the control, we know that is satisfying this, and this, and this, and this. Now that's a difficult thing to do if you're a mature organization. But like, you do not want to get into a situation when you're doing a control 7 times, same control 7 times for 7 different things. You do it once and understand that you're complying against those 7 things. That's optimization of controls and efficiency and resiliency as we move forward. And there are lots of firms as part of DORA have gone off and sort of brought in these standards and processes and checks, which are sitting over there anyway for different reasons. And they've made themselves inefficient.
Which often does happen again when you get new regulation, to your point, because you're talking about very complex organizations, then you shouldn't you don't necessarily know fully what you have in place. But I think that's the being able to map that is a really good starting point. I mean, most organizations where I have talked to them about DORA, that's part of what we have looked at first is, okay, these are the requirements, what do we already have? But not everybody is necessarily approaching in that way. And I'm not sure about your question there, Rob, whether AI is the answer or a liability. It certainly has liability written in some cases, but it's the efficiency side of maybe being able to answer some of those questions about what would I already have in place, which might be helpful.
I think you sorry, it's inevitable. You have to jump in. Jump in and be involved in those AI discussions, especially in the roles that you have, because it's if the organizations don't move, they're going to be left behind. It's so you got to embrace those projects. Not say yes, move ahead, but you got to be in those conversations now.
Definitely. Yeah. Well, the conversations are happening, to your point. If you're not in them, then they're just happening without you, which is never helpful. Fantastic. Okay. Any last questions? I'm just going to, whilst gathering that, I'm going to post the QR code in the chat for our next meeting, which will be on supply chain resilience. So kind of extending this conversation, but taking a wider scope around third parties and suppliers. So please register, and you will get details of that. But any last comments or questions from anybody?
Great. And anybody feel free to reach out. Love to have a chat. And it was a pleasure.
Thank you, Shane, and appreciate that. I'm sure there are some people that have got more specific questions, and so the offer is very good.
Thank you.
Thank you, Shane.
Bye bye. Take care,
Thank
everyone.
you. Bye bye.
Bye bye.
Thank
Hello.
you.
Bye-bye.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Ellen.
See you soon.